Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. You may or may not know, but one of the greatest basketball dynasties of the 1990s was the Chicago Bulls. Phil Jackson was the team's head coach, and through his effective leadership, he led the Bulls to 6 NBA championships during the decade, including two three-peat championships, 1991, 1992, 1993, and then again in 1996, 1997, and 1998. Those two three-peats really put Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen on the map as two of the most talented basketball players to ever play the game. And the coordination of those two individuals as teammates is still the stuff of legends. Both of those individuals played key roles in both of those three-peat performances. Now, in the very first of the three-peat series, the Bulls defeated the LA Lakers. Now, at that time, the LA Lakers were led by Magic Johnson. It took 5 games for the Bulls to win their first NBA championship. The very next year, they bested the Portland Trailblazers in 6 games. And in 1993, they closed out their very first three-peat by defeating the Phoenix Suns in 6 games. And this cemented their place in history. Now, at the end of each championship season, what did they do? The team gathered at center court with their coach. They hoisted the trophy over their heads and they celebrated the win. And then it was back to work preparing for what's next. Now, in 1996, the Bulls made another run at the NBA championship, and in that year, they defeated the Seattle Supersonics in 6 games. The next year, they faced and overcame the Utah Jazz in a 6-game battle to win their second NBA championship in a row. And history was made once again when the Bulls, for a second time, defeated the Utah Jazz to complete their second three-peat. Now, if you visit the Chicago Bulls Stadium, each one of those NBA championships is memorialized by a banner that hangs from the ceiling. It serves as a constant reminder to the fans and to the players of the victories that they had achieved during those incredible years and the history that had been made. That banner and those banners that hang there to this day are constant reminders of the dramatic wins that really established the Chicago Bulls as one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history. But remember, that banner was a memorial to the past. Now, we could say a very similar tale and tell a very similar story about the Boston Celtics. They won 8 consecutive championships, including 2 three-peats of their own. Or we could tell a very similar story about the LA Lakers, who also completed that coveted NBA three-peat. And while the players and the coaches were different and they happened at different times and in different seasons, the storyline was effectively the same. At the end of each championship season, what happened? The team gathered at center court with their coach, they hoisted the trophy over their heads, and they celebrated the win. And then it was back to work, preparing for what's next. And I think you could repeat that story with really any professional sports team. And I mean, if you think about it, any professional sports team, after a championship win, what do? They hoist the trophy, they don the swag, they put on the ring, they enjoy the parade, they hang the banner, and then they get back to work. All of those trappings of success, the trophy, the banner, the ring, the swag, all of those trappings of success serve as a reminder of what was. They're a reminder of what had been, again, a memorial to the past. So when we think about the banners that hang in our gyms or the trophies or other things that we have that are memorials of successes in our lives, they remind us of the win. It's a symbol of victory. It's a reminder of what was, but it's a memorial to the past. Now, let's shift gears and let's look at another major team that experienced a different outcome. 1944, the Green Bay Packers won the NFL championship. At that time in football, they were considered the dominant force in the Western Conference throughout the early 1940s. They had multiple playoff appearances and multiple championships. Now, starting in the next year after that incredible NFL championship, 1945, the Packers began to experience a period of decline and losing seasons that continued until 1958. And the question is, what happened and what was different than what we saw with the Celtics, with the Lakers, or with the Bulls? Now, this was a team, just from looking at it from the outside, whose owners gave the Packers everything they needed to be successful. They went out and recruited the very best players. They went out and hired the very best coaches who hired the very best staff. They had the best equipment. They had everything that money could buy. But despite having the very best of everything that was available to them at the time, that team, the Packers, simply couldn't turn anything around. Matter of fact, it really came to a head in 1958 when at the end of the season, the Green Bay Packers had 1 win, 10 losses, and 1 tie. So the owners announced they were bringing in a new head coach, a former New York Giants offensive coordinator named Vince Lombardi. Now, Vince Lombardi had started as an assistant coach and later a head coach at St. Cecilia High School. He then went on to coach at Fordham University, and later he was the head coach at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Now, when Lombardi came to the Lakers, he came with a reputation, and that reputation was one as a coach who focused on meticulous preparation and high demanding standards. He believed that the players should be prepared to show up and be ready for battle. Now, when he got to the practice field, this demand for meticulous preparation and his demanding standards really showed up when he began to focus on the fundamentals. He believed in the importance of preparation and simplicity, doing the simple things well and being able to perform them to the best of your ability. While he was on the field and he was training this team, he preached efficiency and the relentless pursuit of excellence above everything else. He wasn't focused on perfection. He was focused on becoming more excellent at the basics. Because when you get good at the basics, you get good at the game. Now, the coaches saw Lombardi as a gruff, tough coach who showed no favorites. Now, interestingly, the prior leadership had coddled the stars, but it wasn't that case with Vince Lombardi. He insisted on everyone showing up and giving their all. It didn't matter if they were an A player or a B player or someone who was on the practice team. He pushed every single player to go above and beyond what they believe they were capable of, and he pushed that team to the point of physical and mental breaking. Lombardi lived by a very simple but a very powerful principle, and this is it. Remember your past, but don't live there. Now, think about what had happened up to this point in the Packers' rise and fall and their demise to going from the best of football to the very worst of football. The Packers had lost their way. After the championship win in 1945, they didn't look beyond the banner. They thought they could simply go and repeat without putting in the extra effort. And once they started losing over time, they began to see themselves no longer as winners. They saw themselves as losers who couldn't catch a break. So Lombardi knew when he got there, he had to turn the team around. They had to stop living in the past and they had to start looking to the future. So he understood he had to shift a mindset from one that was focused on and willing to accept losing as the likely outcome to seeing themselves as winners once again. So Lombardi showed up with an unwavering belief in his players, and he made that known at every single practice as he pushed them to the point of physical and mental exhaustion, and he demanded that they show up and continue to improve and get better every single day. And as he strove and as he pushed them, all of a sudden, you started to see the results improve on the practice field. As they began to execute the fundamentals at an ever higher level, it started to show up in the scrimmages as every scrimmage got a little bit better. And then when they went into the preseason and the regular season games, they discovered because they had worked so hard during the training season, they were able to give their all without getting tired, and they were able to outwork and outplay the other teams. Now, the other thing Vince Lombardi did was he continued to preach to his players, I want you to see yourself as the winner you are. He understood that mindset matters, and he had to shift their mindset from seeing themselves as losers to seeing themselves as a team that could win a championship once again. And if you take a look at the results, they speak for themselves. Under the leadership of Vince Lombardi, the Green Bay Packers went on to experience a period of unprecedented success. They went on to win 5 NFL championships in 7 years, including the first 2 Super Bowls. Now, the era from 1959 to 1967 is often referred to in NFL lore as the Lombardi era, and it's considered one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history. So, what's the takeaway from the stories? First, you've got to remember your past, but you can't keep living there. If we go back and look at the stories I shared, and we look at the Bulls, the Lakers, and the Celtics, they all shared one thing in common. During their dynastic periods, they looked beyond the banner, and they continued to ask themselves, what's next? They were not content to live looking back and remembering yesterday's wins. They wanted to win again today. These teams understood that the quality of thinking and the quality of their performance that won the championship in the prior year was not going to be sufficient to repeat and win the championship again in the year that followed. So they not only focused on their physical ability, they focused on their mental ability, and they continually focused on stretching the quality of their thinking. Now, as we look at these 3 teams in their dynastic periods, what we see was that in each of these entities, the Bulls, the Celtics, and the Lakers, every single one of those teams was hallmarked by a return to the fundamentals after each NBA championship win. What did they do? They went back and they reviewed the film of the season. They took notes of where they executed well as where they didn't. They paid attention to what they performed at a high level so they could tweak that and keep doing it. They noticed what they were doing okay, they needed to improve on so they could do better the next time. They also took notice of what they weren't doing well so that I either improve in that area or stop doing that because it wasn't working and delivering success. Also, they took the time as they reviewed those films to note where the opposing teams that they were playing were able to gain a tactical advantage so they could then go back and work on the floor to devise a strategy or a series of strategies to thwart that from happening again in the future. At the end of the day, it was about one thing. It was about the fact that these 3 teams were not content to stay where they were, resting on yesterday's wins. All 3 of these teams chose instead to look beyond the banner, to look beyond yesterday's win, and to focus on improving, number 1, their individual performance, and number 2, honing how well they could work together, collaborate, and coordinate as a team so they could execute as one on the floor. They chose to look beyond the banner and continue to ask themselves, what's next? Remember your past, but don't live there. Now, on the other hand, when we go back and we look at the story of the Packers, what do we see? We see a group of men that went from seeing themselves as winners who couldn't be beaten to losers who couldn't win. And once they became comfortable with this view of themselves as losers that couldn't win, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Try as they might, they couldn't win. And it didn't matter what they did or what they tried or whatever combination they brought to the field, because of their thinking, they were destined to lose. Essentially, they had forgotten the banner that reminded them of how good they had been in the past. And instead, they chose to accept a self-imposed banner of defeat. They chose to embrace a trophy of inferiority, and they held that image tightly in their thoughts. It's important to remember this: as you think, you become. So the Packers as a team had done what? They had crafted an image of mediocrity in their thinking, and they chose to hold on to it so tightly they believed that was the only outcome that they could experience. And we all know that we can't outperform the quality of our thinking, so they couldn't perform in any way other than seeing themselves as a loser. Until they were willing to change their thinking, there was no way, no matter what they did, that they could even give themselves a shot at success. That's why the power of belief can't be understated. And that's why in my book, Black Belt Leadership, that is the very first leadership principle. You've got to master yourself if you want to become a black belt leader in life. So when we look at the Packers, what do we see? We see a team that failed to see themselves as the winners that they once were, and they failed to believe that they could do it again. And if you look at it, it's really interesting because the talent was there. The coaching staff was top notch. The owners of the team spent significant amounts of money providing everything the coaches and the players asked for. But the one thing those owners couldn't give those players and those coaches and that team was a belief in themselves. And as the losses mounted, so did the belief in each player's mind that they had not only failed, but they saw themselves as failures. And once they saw themselves as failures, they were stuck where they are, as they are, and until they changed their thinking, they couldn't change their outcomes. Now, the Packers had forgotten one thing. Failure, like success, is only a moment in time. Now, think about it. You and I, how many times in our life have we started out to do something successful only to fail? We may have failed many, many times in our lives, and we all have, but we're not a failure unless we choose to stay in that moment of failure. I want to say that again. We may have failed at some point or at some time in our lives, but we are not a failure unless we choose to stay in that moment of failure. If you get knocked down in the ring, you're not counted out if you get back up and get back in the fight. But if you get knocked down and you lay there and get counted out, you chose not to get up and get back in the fight. And for the Packers, that's what they did. They chose to relive that moment of failure over and over again in their thoughts. And once again, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Packers chose to remember that self-imposed banner of defeat, and they chose, for whatever reason, not to look past it. And understand this, when you can't see a way to win, all you can see is how to lose, and that's what you're going to do. That's an important lesson to learn. When you can't see the win, all you see is the loss. Now, if we look again at how Vince Lombardi turned the Packers franchise around, what did he do? He implemented three very simple changes that transformed that team from losers into an NFL powerhouse, one of the greatest dynasties ever to play the game of football. But most importantly, I want to go back and I want to look at how you and I apply these three simple but effective and powerful principles to our lives. First, remember the past, but don't live there. You know, sometimes in life we win, and other times in life we don't. Guess what? That's life. There's going to be success, there's going to be failure. We have the opportunity to experience both and learn from both. So what do I mean by that? It's important that you and I examine the wins and the losses that we experience and learn the lessons that the wins and the losses are trying to teach us. From the wins, what can we learn? We can learn what worked well so we can keep doing it. We can learn what worked okay, we need to get better at so it works better the next time we do it. And we can also learn to pay attention to what doesn't work. So we can either fix that or stop doing it altogether so it doesn't cause us to make the same mistake over and over again. Every single day, life wants to reveal to us lessons that if we are open and willing to learn, will empower us and they will help us learn and grow and improve to become a better version of who we are and what we do. As black belt leaders, that's what we do. We strive daily for personal growth. And one of the ways we do that is by reflecting on each and every experience that we go through during the day, because as we reflect on those experiences and we evaluate the lessons that are there, we learn to recognize thoughts and behaviors that we're engaging in that aren't serving us well, that may be holding us back. And we can now replace those thoughts and behaviors with thoughts and behaviors that will allow us to move forward to bigger and better things. Remember, we remember the past. We apply the lessons that we learn, but we don't stay there. Now, the second lesson we can learn from Vince Lombardi is this: we strive for excellence and we focus on mastering the fundamentals. You know, one of the things that made Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and even Tiger Woods such exceptional athletes is the fact that they continually focused on the fundamentals. For every single one of them, if you look at their workout routine, it wasn't the pursuit of perfection, because they all understood perfection is a myth. What we saw in each of their lives as they went onto the floor or onto the courts to do what they do and to practice the fundamentals, what we saw in each and every one of their lives was the relentless pursuit of black belt excellence as they focused on honing the fundamentals. We saw Vince Lombardi do that very same thing with the Green Bay Packers. Vince Lombardi reminded the Packers and he proved to them that the fundamentals matter. You know, it's doing even those little things with excellence that can compound success over time. You know, that's why the basketball greats, even as good as they are, still shoot hundreds of free throws every week. It's why golfers that are some of the best in the world practice hundreds of putts every single week. It's why quarterbacks and receivers that are some of the best in the NFL run the same routes hundreds of times every week, practicing throwing and catching and what they do after they catch the ball. You know, in martial arts, it's a known fact that when we master the fundamentals, we master the art. And that same principle is true in life. When we master the fundamentals of life, we master life itself. Now, the last thing we get from Vince Lombardi is this: we've got to see ourselves as the winners that we are. It's very, very important that you and I pay attention to the thoughts we're thinking and what we're saying to ourselves. That nagging little voice in between our ears can often be one of the greatest detriments to success that you and I have to deal with every single day. Because if our inner voice is constantly reminding us of all the things that we can't do, over time, if we continue to listen to that voice, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in our lives, and we're going to hit a lid of how far that we can grow. So what do we have to do? We've got to replace the thoughts that aren't serving us well with thoughts that do. You know, in my book, Black Belt Leadership, I point out as the first character quality of a black belt leader is this: you cannot achieve what you do not believe. So you've got to learn to replace those self-limiting beliefs with beliefs that are going to be limitless. And one of the best ways we can do that is to practice daily affirmations. You know, rather than telling ourselves we can't do something, maybe daily we should begin to tell ourselves that we are more than capable, that we have everything within us that we need to achieve the success that we've been put on this earth to fulfill. Maybe instead of telling ourselves that we're not good enough, we should be constantly reminding ourselves that we're getting better and better in every way, every single day. You know, I love the fact that as we practice these affirmations, these positive statements to ourselves, we're constantly building ourselves up, and we're reminding us that we can say and do and become more as we remind ourselves that we have not yet arrived. We're still on a journey, and excellence is something that we relentlessly pursue every day. You and I have an opportunity every single day to become a little bit better than we were the day before. That is the pursuit of excellence. And as we remind ourselves we are more than capable, as we remind ourselves that every day in every way we're getting better and better, we are continually giving ourselves the fuel that we need to think limitless thoughts. And when we think limitless thoughts, we begin to embrace limitless beliefs. You know, what we continually say to ourselves, we believe. And what we believe, we can do. I want to say that again because that is a powerful statement. And if you get nothing else out of today's podcast, I want you to get this. What we continually say to ourselves, we believe, and what we believe, we can do. I love the way Henry Ford put it. He said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Albert Einstein brilliantly said, the world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It can't be changed or improved without changing our thinking. What we continually say to ourselves, we believe. And what we believe, we can do. So let me leave you with this. I want you to celebrate the wins. I want you to learn from your losses. And then, like the great teams that we talked about in the lesson today, I want you to get back to work. Remember, the most successful people throughout history have celebrated the wins, they've learned from their losses, and then they put their hand to the plow, their eye on the prize, and they continue to move forward. So if we do those three things, celebrate the win, learn from the loss, get back to work, this is how we repeat and three-peat, seeing beyond the banner. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.